Providing high-quality care for patients is at the core of all healthcare systems. But how can we do that in the context of care becoming more industrialized? Are these goals made even harder in the middle of a global pandemic? How can patients be at the center of revolutionizing care? This is Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast. In this episode, we are joined by Dr. Victor Montori. I first asked Dr. Montori about what first interested him about health and healthcare.
In relation to what got me into healthcare, well, I'm originally from Peru. And in Peru, you get into medical school, you apply to medical school right out of high school. So I was 16 years old when I had to make a career decision. And then it's an 8-year-long affair. So I don't know. I didn't know what I was getting into. There are no physicians in my direct family, but I was interested initially in electronics, and then thought I needed something warmer, and so became interested in nerves and how the brain worked, and I thought I might become a neuroscientist or a neurologist, and then I realized to become a neurologist, somebody that takes care of people with brain problems, you have to become a physician first. So, I got to go to medical school. And so I essentially got into healthcare in not with the usual story that I wanted to help people or be a force for good in the world. It was more of a scientific curiosity. Obviously things, if you enter on an 8-year trajectory between age 16 and 25, and your country is going through terrorism and hyperinflation and a cholera epidemic, and you end up training in hospitals and clinics that were severely underinvested and understaffed, and with coming quite closely in touch with suffering and with injustice. You become, at that age, I think, quite transformed. So clearly the reasons or the lack of reasons to go in transformed tremendously during that period, to a commitment to care for people that I think existed on my way out of medical school 8 years later.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have known what I wanted to do with myself at 16.
Yeah.
But you read a lot about this term, the patient revolution. So can you tell me what you mean by that?
Sure. It's healthcare has in the United States in particular is an industrial sector of the economy. It accounts for about 20% of the U.S. economy, and is considered an industrial sector in which people can come in and make quite a bit of money. Many countries see the United States healthcare system as the best, capable of the best care in the world. And they believe that the way the system is organized, funded, the way the incentives are set up, is perhaps what allows that system to be the best in the world. And so they imitate it. My country of origin, Peru, is one of those countries in which the evolution of medicine first was about imitating the French, or maybe the Germans, and then eventually the Americans in how healthcare should be organized. One of the things that has occurred in the interim is the kinds of diseases, the kinds of problems that people seek healthcare for have dramatically changed. And so where North American healthcare in general has evolved towards improving the care of people with trauma, with a structural problem in their body, requiring surgeries, ever more complicated, invasive procedures, fixing medicine, the kind of things that you have something broken and you come in to be fixed on the one hand, but on the other hand, infections that we could cure. That shaped a medicine of heroism, of the giants of medicine, invariably surgeons, who were able to do incredible feats of craftsmanship as they gave life back to people who otherwise would have lived with very significant disability or would have died prematurely. Today, the most common patient that comes to a healthcare facility does not have a disease that can be fixed by surgery or cured by a treatment that is a silver bullet, like an antibiotic would be for a bug. The most common patient that comes to healthcare is a person that lives with a chronic condition. In fact, as the people age, they accumulate chronic conditions, and the average middle-aged American lives with at least one chronic condition, which means that about 50% of people in middle age live with, two or more chronic conditions.
Yeah.
By the time people hit 65, it's everyone. By the time people hit 90, everybody lives with morbidity, which is a technical term for living with multiple chronic conditions. So the healthcare today is prepared to deal with a problem that is no longer crossing the doors at the same rate as it used to be in the past. And now we have a number of people who we cannot fix. And the care for them requires a commitment to the patient, paying attention and to their situation in high definition, to their biology and their biography, being able to then respond with good science in an evidence-based fashion, in a safe way, crafting treatments that will live alongside with the life of this patient, treatments that should not interfere with what this patient is trying to achieve in their life, with the kinds of things that they love to do, and treatments that are respectful of people's limited time, energy, and attention, that should not be dedicated to be optimal patients, but rather should be dedicated to live their lives. And so this weaving in of the treatment that is now requires this deep partnership with patients and working together to achieve the patient goals of care. Well, that system is not ready for that on the science side, and it's clearly not ready for that if it sees healthcare as an opportunity to make money. And so the patient revolution is a movement that calls this form of healthcare industrialized healthcare, that finds in industrial healthcare an inability to care for people, in which the mission of care has been now corrupted, turned into a mission of profiteering and personal gain, and finds that healthcare professionals have allowed this to happen, if not directly profited from that situation, from that corruption of the mission. So the patient revolution invites the rest of us, whether we're healthcare professionals or just regular citizens, to turn away from industrial healthcare, which no longer serves its purpose because it's corrupted its mission, and turn towards a new vision of careful and kind care for all. And so that movement, that patient revolution, that turning away from industrial care and toward careful and kind care, is what we are focused on now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that term, careful and kind care. So how do we make sure that we're providing that to patients?
It's not easy, and it's not default. It's not simple. It's not cannot be standardized. Cannot be put in the organization diagrams. Cannot be protocolized. In other words, is not something that is subject to industrialization. By careful, I mean care that is for this patient, not for patients like this. Is care that is evidence-based, and so This is my homage to one of the major Canadian contributions to the world,
Hmm.
evidence-based medicine. And so the notion that clinicians will draw from the best available research evidence to inform what might be done to address the problems that patients have. So it's evidence-based. It is safe. So we need to make sure that it minimizes whatever harms may be in place. And so this careful care also has to be kind. And by kind, I don't mean nice.
Hmm.
What I mean by kind, I'm using that word in a number of ways. First, perhaps the Germanic origin of the word kin, the notion that clinicians must treat patients as a member of their own tribe, as not an other, but as one of us. And so in that way, the clinician would care for that patient in a manner that would reflect that particular person's views and goals and values and preferences. It requires a curiosity and getting to know this person as one of us. Again, getting to know that person in full. And it's kind in another fashion. Because of people accumulating multiple chronic conditions, they also accumulate the treatments for each of those conditions. And about 40% of patients, when we survey them about the burden that treatments place on their lives, 40% tells it's unsustainable. And so kind care also requires that we as clinicians respect that patients have a limited amount of energy, time, attention that they much rather dedicate to living their lives, fulfilling their obligations to themselves, their families, their communities, their jobs. I have 3 boys, and I asked them, what are they going to do when you grow up? And none of them have ever told me they want to grow up to be great patients. They have other dreams, right? And
Yeah.
so it's sometimes we in healthcare get into this idea that the fundamental reason patients are alive is to be great patients. And in fact, essentially everyone has other much more interesting goals. And so what we need to make sure is that we respect that limited set of resources that patients have and make sure that our treatments are minimally disruptive of their lives. So, and we help patients weave those treatments into the routines of their daily activity so that living with the chronic conditions they have does not necessarily mean living for those conditions, but in fact, it just simply means that they have to deploy additional skills and resources to achieve their life's hopes and dreams. And we should be a contributor to that rather than holding people back from that approach. So that's what we mean by careful and kind care.
Thanks. Yeah. Um, so my academic background is actually in political science. So I like to always ask people about power whenever I can. So what do you think of the current power dynamics between patients and healthcare providers and researchers? And what do you think we might need to change?
So one of my power moves, if I just kind of jazz with what you're offering me here, is to make sure that we check our language. And I don't find the term healthcare providers particularly helpful.
Sure.
Because a provider, as it's used currently in the language, describes both the organizations as well as the people. And I see care as fundamentally a human endeavor. Organizations do not care. And you just have to talk to any retiree who will tell you that they gave their life to a particular organization and the organization never said thank you or was loyal, because of course organizations are not people. They don't have hearts, they cannot care. So healthcare providers do not care. Who cares then are people, and what is the term for those people? I would prefer that we use 2 terms. One is healthcare professionals, to highlight the fact that there is a professionalism element to being a healthcare professional. In other words, a series of norms that put rails to the fact that you're going to be placed in front of people who, by virtue of living with disease, may be particularly vulnerable to the exercise of power that you will have as a clinician. And so it's that professional set of values that protects the patient from the power that you have if wielded outside of those professional bounds. So that's one word. The other one is clinician, which I just used. And that, by virtue of its root, it basically describes essentially anyone at the bedside. So anyone that it has enough, has the privilege, I see that as a privileged position, has the privilege of being with patients at the time of their worst, at the time of their greatest need. And so the word clinician encompasses physicians, nurses, therapists, psychologists, physical therapists, pharmacists, anybody who, by virtue of their role, gets access to the real or metaphorical bedside of a patient who comes in for help. So so the power issue, which is what you're asking me, I think is a substantial concern, particularly if clinicians fall in the trap of thinking that they are doing patients a favor for seeing them. And I have had the unfortunate experience of seeing clinicians who have thought of themselves as incredibly busy, too busy to be bothered, and where they were placed in front of patients, they were the most important people in the room, and that they themselves deserved a particular position. I went once to a clinician's office who had architecturally set his chair about 3 inches taller than the chair where the patient would sit. So not only were you coming to see a demigod, but you also had to look up, to look at him. So power, the reason societies developed institutions and rules for the most part was to protect the vulnerable. And so health professionals have professionalism elements that are important to protect the vulnerable. And of course, there's quite a bit of rules and regulations in healthcare that are set in place to protect the vulnerable. But in the privacy of the clinical encounter, it's really up to these two humans to find that place of trust within which healing can take place. And I also think that in the course of interacting repeatedly over time with patients, love emerges. It is not uncommon for clinicians to say, "Oh, I'm seeing Mrs. Jones. Oh, I love Mrs. Jones." Or for Mrs. Jones to tell her friends, "I'm going to see, Dr. So-and-so. Oh, I love Dr. So-and-so." And it's a different kind of love. It's not an awkward or weird or Freudian weird love. It's not romantic love, but it's maybe fraternal love. It's the love that evolves from having deep conversations, that evolves from being curious and getting to know the other person, and being able to use one's creativity, knowledge, experience, expertise to respond to that situation. So power to me is on the other side of that equation. I mean, I'm talking about coming together for care in a situation of kindness and respect and love. Power is going to be on the dark side of that equation. And it really needs to be negotiated between people. And that negotiation cannot take place if the system, the setup, the setting, the context establishes an a priori gap, a priori distance, an a priori power differential between patients and clinicians. So in cultures in which there is such a power differential, not only are patient-clinician interactions, particularly related to chronic conditions, interactions based on, as I said, based on, for instance, love, not possible, because one of them, the person that is supposed to care, is not that curious about the other one, is interested in themselves. and the distance between the two is made longer by these power differential, but also it's unsafe. Because if there is such a power differential, not only would patients not be able to say, but doctor, I don't think I should take that medicine. Last time I took it, it caused me this problem. You would not want to interrupt or contradict this clinician. But it's also likely that other clinicians that work alongside this particular individual may not be allowed or may have learned the hard way not to correct or bring attention to a potential gap in judgment or in execution. So clinicians who claim in the case I just mentioned, a physical higher ground, or or demand a higher position, and demonstrate that through gestures, through the clothes they wear, or for instance, the way they set up themselves or the furniture in interactions. These are indications not just of a difficult encounter in which patients will have to spend additional emotional energy to try to get what they need, but also an indication that perhaps the safest place for that patient is the exit sign and the back door.
Mm. So one of the things that we do at the Alberta Spore Patient Engagement Platform is make sure that researchers and patients can partner together in health research. So what do you think of the potential of these kind of partnerships for health research? And is there anything that we can learn from some of your thinking about the patient revolution?
I think one of the most difficult things to do is to work collaboratively with other people who have different personal stories, different academic or different backgrounds in terms of their activities or training. Even among researchers that are trained in science, collaborative research with others is incredibly hard. Egos notwithstanding, sometimes just the fact that we use different language and value different things creates barriers that need to be overcome. And so a general humility, a general curiosity about the other, and a general commitment to doing better work because we're doing it together and needs to be fueling that partnership. Unfortunately, many partnerships are tokenistic. Many partnerships prefer the visibility of the partnership to its efficacy, and end up with cynicism as people feel used, or people begin to use the other because they assume that that's how things should work. We have been working with my research hat at the Mayo Clinic when we started our research program in November 2004. The first thing we set up was a patient advisory group. This is a group, was a group at the time of people with type 2 diabetes. That was at the time what we were doing most investigation about. Now it's investigation has broadened outside of that particular field. But at the time, there were patients with type 2 diabetes that volunteered their own time to meet with us the third Monday of every month from 5:30 to 7 to discuss the kinds of research projects that we were doing, the research materials that we were using with patients, and the dissemination of research results. This is before it was mandated by funding agencies or recognized or recommended by experts. It just felt like the right thing to do when we're claiming to do patient-centered research, to partner with patients in making sure that that was true. We established processes that were very consultative. In other words, we will bring stuff to them, but it was not a real partnership. I mean, in a real partnership, I would expect patients to say, let's investigate this, and the research team kind of going along and following that leadership to the extent that it was reasonable and it was an important issue. But frankly, we've never done that. Most of the time we have proposed and they have provided very generously they have provided advice and told us when we were out to lunch, and corrected us, and also pushed us forward. And so we've never really developed a true partnership. And the other thing that's occurred is that the folks that were with us back then, many of them are still with us. I mean, we're talking about 16 years later. And so to what extent are people that have been involved with us for that period of time, to what extent have they learned about what we value and are now sort of, to some extent, reflecting back that sort of co-created sense of values versus the raw, unadulterated view of the person on the street that does not have, 10, 12, 15, 16 years of interaction with researchers on a monthly basis. So even in our situation where we are champions for this sort of approach, we struggle with is it a true partnership? B, is it productive? And C, we struggle with issues of, are these patients representative of any other patients, particularly now after all these years? They've declined compensation from day one. So who are the voices we're not listening to as a result of that particular policy? Do we have people who are, in fact, privileged talking to us? And who are the voices that, because of the way in which we meet and the way in which the conditions of that meeting, who are the voices we're leaving out? These are all questions that we, as a research group, have failed to prioritize in our engagement. And as a result, I do not know that we are, maybe I should say, I'll be more positive and say, I know we're not a good model on how to do this properly. And I don't want to be anything but grateful for the contributions of these patient colleagues, which I'm completely comfortable of calling patient colleagues, because we work, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. But again, it's not a perfect union, if I may use that expression.
Mm-hmm. What about some of the things that are happening more recently? So obviously, COVID is top of everyone's mind. So what do you think COVID is going to do right now and also in the future to health and healthcare and health research?
Several options, right? Option number one is nothing. There are so many moments in our lives in which we have thought, oh, this will change everything. And then you look back and it's hard to see what that change was about. I mean, 9/11 comes to mind.
Yes. Yeah.
The crash in 2018 comes to mind. That will change banking forever. That would change Wall Street forever. Right. But this time is different. I think change does not occur as a chance outcome of a disaster like this. I think change occurs as a choice that people in a position to make that choice make, perhaps triggered by a disaster like this. So the question that you're really asking is, what kind of choices are we going to make now, triggered by this disaster, that have a shot at changing what might happen in the future? And Rebecca Solnit, who I love to cite, has done quite a bit of work, both on understanding disasters and what happens after disasters, and about hope. And about disasters, she first points out that the origin of the word has to do with losing one's star, losing one's direction, disaster. And she finds that when humans experience disasters, there's a stereotypical response. It's almost like you get your computer that gets unplugged from the wall, and when you get plugged back on, you basically come back on, you reboot with your default settings. And when humans get rebooted to their default settings, their default behavior is towards community. It is collaborative. It is creative. It is not fight or flight only, but also nurture, and take care of folks. And we've seen this here, right? There's a beautiful graffiti that emerged during this COVID pandemic, that said that, I'm not going to do justice to it, that it said that the fact that streets were empty were quiet statements of solidarity of everyone for everyone's sake, right? The fact that people stayed indoors was an incredible manifestation of solidarity. And Solnit would say, yeah, that's what we do. That's what humans do when they don't get to run these alternative softwares of selfishness, competition, and the prevailing of the strongest or the fittest. So that's one point. So we have seen in this pandemic a bit of that arch, in which collaboration and creativity, people making thousands of masks for others to use and giving them away for free, and donations and all this sort of stuff. But then we sort of abandoned that, and we're taping this in June, and in many places, the pandemic has plateaued or has massively reduced its impact, and people are already, trying to behaving in ways that are self-interested and selfish and blah blah blah. So what happened there? That we lose our window of opportunity, and maybe. But the other thing that the brief period of community has taught us is, boy, we have that software in us. We can be collaborative. We can be creative. We can be community oriented. If my joke here will be, we can be Canadian. And we've done it. We've done it with each other. We've experienced it. It's happened in our lifetime. If people start talking about, maybe we can go and sing to each other from balconies, or play bingo across the street with the elder folks who are stuck in nursing homes, unable to receive visitors. People say, "Oh, that's just nice poetry, but that will never happen." Well, it has happened. We've seen it happen, right? So the question is, having had that experience, does that change in people the sense of what's possible? And if you have now a new sense of what's possible, does that change what you allow yourself to dream about? So that's the first thing to think about. The second one is, what is the nature of hope? And Solnit tells us that that you can be an optimist, and an optimist thinks that things are going to be all right regardless of what we do. You can be a pessimist, the opposite, right? That things are going to be terrible regardless of what we do. Or you can hold on to hope, and hope basically is this notion that maybe there's a sliver of a chance that the future might be better if we do something today about it. If we just were to do something today about it, maybe there's a shot at the future being better. So action is what makes hope possible, and hope is what drives that action. So what is COVID going to do, in particular to healthcare and healthcare research? It really depends on us taking stock of what we've discovered as possible in our own lifetime with the people that we are around, which is magical, and it's massive, and it's community, and it's creative, and it's filled with solidarity and love. That's possible. And the recognition that it doesn't have to be like it's always been, that we can change healthcare, that we can change the way we care for each other if we just get ourselves to do something different today. And so that's extremely powerful. as a recognition if we just get to recognize it. Because once you do that, then you can start dreaming, right? I would like healthcare to be not an industrial sector. I would like healthcare to be an opportunity, something that we do as a community to ensure the complete flourishing of everyone in that community. It's a commitment like education, like a roof and nutrition for kids. It's something we do so that everybody has a shot, or the best possible shot, at demonstrating their full capabilities, right? That's what we do as a community. Healthcare is not a business opportunity, right? Healthcare is something that we do as humans for other humans to ensure they can flourish. And so what research can we do that will further that view? What research translation into practice can we do to translate that view into a reality? The possibilities are not only incredible from a creative standpoint, but powerful as hell. And the question is, are we going to embrace them? Are we going to take them on? Or are we going to pretend that this never happened and we can continue on with our simple little things that get us through, get us the grants, get us the papers as researchers, get us the promotion, and if we do so, at least what keeps me up at night is, if we do so, how are we going to explain it to those who come afterwards, who are not going to believe, oh, you were there during COVID, and what did you do after that? What would you do with all that? If the answer is, well, nothing much, but I'm a full professor, then that's going to be on us.
Yeah. So what would you say then if somebody was inspired by the possibilities of right now? What advice would you have for people who might want to lead the patient revolution?
Well, I don't think that. I think people that are successful and have achieved something may be in a position to give advice. We're starting. We're just starting. We are looking at a world filled with opportunities to make a difference. But for some reason, which is, you said you're a political scientist, so you know that reasons are very clear, right? So the status quo builds moats and walls and fortresses and guards and anything that it can to protect itself from change. And so it's actually really scary and hard to decide on if you're a researcher on a research agenda, if you're a patient partner, to partner and bring trust and intensity to what you do. If you're a healthcare administrator, to listen to what needs to be done and act accordingly. If you're a clinician, to let go of issues of power and position and income that you've mentioned before. These are all very hard personal choices in which the framing is almost always put forward as a framing of loss, which we are programmed in our brain to reject. So I'm in no position to give any advice to anybody. You can see this, it's visible. So the question is, now that you've seen it, now that you've experienced, can you live with yourself not acting on what you've noticed? And it's almost like a meta version of care. You've noticed, and now you need an obligation to respond to that care. A clinician, as a clinician, that when I see a patient, if I fail to notice a need and I don't respond, well, that's on me for failing to notice. But the lack of a response has as its origin the failure to notice. Here we notice what's wrong. For instance, all these people that were infected by COVID and had a severe presentation, and they were facing death in intensive care units or in nursing homes. We decided to leave them without their caregivers, to leave them with a loved one holding their hands while they were struggling to catch a breath, while they were facing death. Right? Okay, so we've noticed that. What should be the response? What is the research response to that situation? What is the administrative response to that situation? Are hospitals going back to the no personal protective equipment for caregivers policy? We're only going to have this for our doctors and nurses. or maybe, you know, on a good day for our doctors or nurses, since many hospitals went without for a while.
True, yeah.
Or are we going to start thinking of our caregivers as integral parts of the healthcare team that we need to make sure will be safe, and will follow some degree of protocol in our nursing homes or our ICUs, so that they can be with their family members as their family members are dying? It's a new question. But we notice that. What is our careful and kind response, and what research is necessary to ensure that the careful and kind response to that problem is the default if this were to happen again, if we were to have a second wave?
Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast, brought to you by the Alberta Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research Patient Engagement Platform. Special thanks to Sandra Zielinski and Sadia Ahmed for their co-production. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you found it, and we hope you'll join us again for more interesting discussions about patient engagement in health research and healthcare.